Now let's get started with lists. A list is a collection of similar items. Even though you can use lists to gather different data types, it is highly recommended that you only store same kind of stuff in the list. Even though you can store multiple different types, and you use that in some other concepts, for example in object-oriented programming, which is not the main scope of this course, but we will discuss object-oriented programming. You can use polymorphism, and there you might have to store different kind of data types, but never use a different data type if you don't know what you're doing. If you know what you're doing, go ahead. I mean, it's up to you what you do with it. Now let's start, and I'm gonna make a temperatures list. These temperatures are in Kelvin, and they're just random values. Some are very high and some are low. And these are my temperatures. I have a list of temperatures. Cool. Now I can calculate the length of these temperatures, how many temperatures I have, just using the same operator that we used in a few videos back, where we calculated the length of a string. So for example, I can print the length using this function called len, and it'll work just fine. As you can see, 6 values are there present in my list. Now how do I access these things? We didn't discuss this when we were discussing data types in a nutshell. We access this using something called an index. An index is just an address, like this is 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Indexing is just like in a sequence. It starts from 0 and keeps going until whatever your size -1 is. Now let me show you how indexing would work in this array or list. For example, this value 234 is present at 0 index, this at 1, and so on. I mean, you can clearly see the pattern here. So if there are 6 total values, the 5 will be the maximum value and 0 will be the minimum value of the index. Now how do I access it? Well, it's simply, we use the square brackets to access it. And if I want to say, well, my value at index 0 is, well, temperatures at 0, and let's print that. As you can see, it's 234. I can store v1, and this can be anything. It's just a variable name. I can store the last value or the 4th value, which is the 5th value but the 4th index, and it gives you 23, which is this value right here. Pretty basic stuff, but if with practice you will be able to get this. Now let's talk about temperatures. If they are in if we want to store temperatures in 2-dimensional array using centigrades. Now this is another concept which is a little too much if you're a total beginner, but I'm going to show it to you because it's important. You should know that. Temperatures with centigrade. Now this is something called a 2-dimensional array. The dimensions of an array can go infinitely. If you know linear algebra, you know what I'm talking about. But dimensions is just, for example, if I have a list here, I can store many lists inside this list. I can store, instead of this number, I can have another list, and that list may have another list. So how many lists you have, how many depths you go, tells you the dimension. So if there is none of them, this is just a 1-dimension. This is just a 1-dimensional list. I can have another list, 2 dimensions, and it's almost like a matrix. But don't worry about it if you don't get it. But this one you should get, that there are dimensions here. There's just 1 dimension, 2 dimension, then there's 3 dimensions to it. And now let's figure this out. Now what we're gonna do is we're gonna add some values in it. For example, let's say there's 275 degrees Fahrenheit, and I also want to store centigrade with it. It is 1.85, but sure, it is 2. Similarly, 273, let's store 0 here. Now we have stored some stuff. Now how does one access a 2-dimensional list? It's pretty simple. You do the same thing. For example, if I want to access T1 in centigrade, what do? Which is the first index here, right? So I go to temperatures with centi. I access the first one. This is gonna give me this thing, this value right here, and I can, again, I have this list now. What do? I want to access the second value, which is in centigrade. I get the temperature of the first value, which is the first index, means the second value in reality, and its centigrade value, and I can print this by using this. Its value is 0. It could be 273 if I do this. Now we're going to talk about just a spread operator, which is pretty simple stuff. For example, I can spread all these values right here into single pieces. It won't be a list anymore when I do that. So let me show you. Spread operator is single asterisk before a list. Single asterisk before a list. And you won't be using this a lot. When you do, make sure you don't mess up. That's why I'm sharing, and we're going to build projects and you will know what I mean. So if you do asterisk of temperatures, you get this spreaded value right there. And we'll see its use later. Now I want to show you another trick where you can store all these values into in a single, without having to write t of, in a single line you can store all these values, and that's called restructuring. Python automatically does that. Let me show you. You might be just getting confused by that. So let's say I want to write, well, t0 and t1. I can just write it directly like that, and just referring to that variable, I have to t0 and t1. I can just print t0 and t1. What is t0? T0 will be a list containing 275 and 2 as referred here. Now it's pretty simple and basic stuff. What I want you to do is I want you to do this exercise where you create a two-dimensional list, but with strings. It's just like this. It's similar to this. There are just strings instead of numbers. Two-dimensional list of your favorite fruits, and also with their taste type. I'll give you the solution later, but it's just that, for example, here you're giving the name of the fruit, for example, or food. You can just replace it with food and their taste type. You can say, well, this is banana and it's sweet, and here is something salty, and then the taste is salty. So that's what I'm talking about. I hope you get it. And then access one of the fruits and then print it. That's all I want you to do. Now this is it for the lists. This is all we're going to talk about lists as far as this course is concerned. Though we're not going to go into much depth here, but this is as far as we're going to go. We're going to discuss how to traverse them using a for loop later. You won't understand this now, but you will soon enough, and that is very important. So rest of the course is just around this. These lists and dictionaries are what we use on the daily basis when we're programming. This is our life. I mean, we deal with data in lists and dictionaries and classes. That's very important, and we're going to discuss that soon enough. And soon enough, you will be able to consider yourself a decent programmer, in a sense that you would know all these rules and you would be able to implement them. So I'll see you in the next video where we're going to discuss dictionaries.